And there are those violent moments where my father was actually trying to kill my mother, choke her to death, and I jumped on his back, and then he swung me off, but it brought enough sense into him to stop. I mean, this is what goes on behind the scenes in closed door homes.
Was that like a drug induced thing at that point?
It was not. He was just an angry, violent man.
Sit your ass down. Sit your ass down. Let's talk about the suffering. It's time to start the pain. Sit your ass down. Sit your ass down and strap in. This is gonna hurt. This is gonna hurt. Let's talk about the suffering. It's time to start the pain. This is gonna hurt. It's time for the Suffering Podcast.
An angel sat on my shoulder and pontificated the proper way to live. This angel impressed the virtue of patience in the pursuit. Embrace all that is good in life, and the fruits of your choices will come back tenfold. This angel promised joy. On the other shoulder sat the devil. He sold a pretty good package. With the promise of instant gratification, little effort, pleasure, and freedom from sorrow and pain. The devil promised all this and much more, and it could be mine in the snap of a finger. The devil promised happiness. There is a difference between happiness and joy. Happiness feels good. It's relatively easy, but it's very temporary. Joy is unshakable and lasts forever, but takes an enormous amount of work and suffering. I'm Kevin Donaldson here with Mike Failace, and on this episode of the Suffering Podcast, we sit down with Ron Lewis to discuss the suffering of a pastor. Ron took all his suffering and used that suffering to build a community of joy. Thank you so much, Pastor Ron, for sitting down with us.
Great to see you, my friend.
Pastor Ron Lewis. They call him the bishop, I heard.
I read that. Mike's exposing me. Yes.
Well, just so you know, Pastor Ron just came out with a book, and we're going to talk a little bit more about this in this episode. It's Miracles in Manhattan. It's a wonderful book. It's a very, I would call it serendipitous book.
Yeah.
Just whether it's chance, and it's going to lead into our social media question.
Yeah, I would call it serendipitous, but I don't know what serendipitous means, so I'll just take your word for it.
We're next episode. I'm putting a dictionary right here, so you could just look up all the big words.
We can add that to our podcast dictionary.
That's it. So that's going to every week we take a question from one of our guests or one of our audience members, and this week was perfect for you because it has specifically to do with Miracles in Manhattan.
Okay.
And Margaret from Kearney writes, "Do you believe in coincidence, and why?" So, Pastor Ron, you're our guest today, so let's hear from you.
Yeah, I personally do not believe in coincidence in an absolute sense. That I believe that this world has order, and that God. I believe we're in an open universe. That means that we can connect with God, and we believe that God acts without crossing our will. At the same time, there is free will, but there is God's plan and purpose. And so I would say we live in a structured universe where things happen, both good and evil, and bad happens. But I don't think anything is coincidental. I think everything has a reason and a purpose, good or bad. I think God uses everything and anything for his glory without being the cause of evil or sinful stuff. That God is good. He's fundamentally good. He cares for all of his creation, all of humanity. And yet he has a plan and a purpose, and sometimes we don't understand that. We live in a lot of mysteries, which if that's what somebody means by coincidental, then sure, I understand what you're saying there. But in an absolute way, I don't think anything is ultimately coincidental. I think everything has a plan. There's a purpose. There's a divine plan and a divine purpose, and we're not just people living in chaos here. We are all part of a plan.
There's a lot of different schools of thought when it comes to religion. Like you have the Calvinist belief, which is like you take a basketball and you spin it, and that's what God did. He just put the basketball up there and spun it, and whatever happens, happens. And then you have those that believe in predestiny, and you sort of just intermingled those two theories where you're not interfering with free will. It's sort of like a Bruce Almighty type of situation.
Gotcha.
Yeah. Just you can do anything you want, you just can't screw with free will. I try to screw with this guy's free will every day.
Isn't Bruce Almighty when he pulled the sun closer?
Yes.
Or
Yeah,
pulled the moon closer.
The moon.
Oh, great.
That was from a
Very-
Jimmy Stewart movie. So, yeah.
Oh, good.
I like that he tells his girlfriend or his
Wonderful
wife.
Life.
Yeah, was it A Wonderful Life? I'm
Yeah.
going to give you the moon. I'll
Great
give you the
one.
moon. Mike, what do you think?
You know, I don't know if it's coincidence or not, but I definitely believe everything happens for a reason. You know, sometimes you're put in a spot for a reason. Sometimes you're not in a spot for a reason. You know, I remember one story when I was growing up. A friend of mine they were going to go down the shore, and they had a whole bunch of guys that were going to get in a car and go down the shore. And I was going to go, and something happened at the last minute, and I didn't go. They wound up getting into a car accident. One kid was killed, another kid was paralyzed.
Unbelievable.
And I could have been in that car that day. And that's something I think about to this day. Was it coincidence I didn't go, or was it, like you said, maybe God's will?
No, it was the devil playing a trick on me. But
Could be.
You know, that your life unfolds from the decisions that you made, that free will decision. So it's a little scary to think about it. If you just take a step right too far, or you take a step left too far, and next thing you know, a couch is falling on you.
Yeah, it's weird, too, because one of the guys that was in the car that day, I still see him all the time, and he's just not the same person, you know. I think about it all the time. Like, I should have been there. I could have been there.
I don't believe in coincidence. I really don't. I'm going to take the other path on that.
Wow.
Because
He's just trying to be
different.
He's trying to be
yeah,
Kevin.
just trying to be
Wasn't
different.
sure where he was coming from.
Yeah, exactly.
Now you put it on the
Listen,
table.
We've been doing this for over a year. I never know where he's coming from.
Isn't that interesting?
I look at my personal incident, my shooting, and I used to look at it as just bad luck, bad coincidence.
Oh, my.
And now, being so far removed from it, there was a purpose behind it.
Right.
There was a purpose behind my suffering. I had to go through it. It was meant for me to lead me in a different direction, to lead me to this show, to the Suffering Podcast, to lead me to you, to lead me to Mike. You know, Mike and I knew each other for 25 years, but we didn't really know each other. So I'm just taking that one example, which sounds really horrible, like I was in the wrong place at the wrong time, but I wasn't. I was in the right place. I was right where I was supposed to be at that particular time when I needed to be there. So I don't. Mark,
You know, and I'm sure you've heard this before, too, about your shooting, because I've heard it about mine. People would say, I'm glad it was you in that situation. Because you have some cops out there that may not have handled that situation correctly.
I'm sure.
could have gone south real quick.
Yep, absolutely. I mean, listen, I'm not blowing smoke up either of our asses. Most cops probably would have done the same thing, but a lot of people said, I'm glad it was you that was there.
The thing with us and the story we're about to get in with you is you had to do it. You had to do it to be who you are. Because without your past, you're not Pastor Ron Lewis. You're not Mike Failace. I'm not Kevin Donaldson.
That's so true.
It's truth. So that's why I don't believe in coincidence. Margaret, thank you so much for sending that in. Keep sending in your questions. We'll try to get them on.
That was Margaret from Kearney. That's a local girl.
That's a local girl. We try to pull them from New York, California. We try to stay within our audience. Before we go any further, I want to thank our biggest sponsor, and that's Toyota of Hackensack. I buy my cars from Toyota Hackensack because I trust them. I know they're going to treat me fairly. I know they're going to give me a good deal, and they're going to have the selection that I want. So go to toyotaofhackensack.com and let them find you a car. So Pastor Ron, and I'm going to call you Pastor Ron because I think you've after 40 years of ministry.
Yeah, that's right. 40 years.
40 years of ministry. I think you've earned that title. If anybody is bestowed that honor on anybody, I think that should be bestowed on you.
Thank you, Kevin.
Well, we call him the bishop.
The bishop. Because that sounds too Catholic.
I read that in his bio before I came up.
Thank you, Mike.
Commonly referred to as the bishop.
It's an affectionate term. It simply means overseer. And when you outgrow one church and you start working in other churches, now it's dozens of churches, that seems to be the title that works. But I love being called pastor. It's what I've been doing. I love people. It's all about people. It's all about people. It's not about big-time theological terms and trying to, come across as if you're some real genius and everybody else is you're condescending, just like looking down upon you. None of that. It's all about people. God's interest, my interest is people.
And I want to ask this very distinct question to you. When you're going out and giving your talks, would it be, because I already know the answer to this. This is a loaded question. If you were speaking to 10,000 people and you were able to get a quarter of your message out, or you're able to speak to that one person and get 100% of your message out? Which would you prefer? I already know this answer, just knowing you in a short time that I do. What do you think that would be?
So I think the message would be good news that God sent his son into the world to live a life that we could not live, to die a death that we should have died, but he did it in our place. And he was wrapped up, a dead man, put in a tomb. 3 days later, he rose. And he's saying to everyone that I'm available. And if you repent, meaning change your mind and turn from your ways and receive just that gift of faith, that your whole life will be put on a brand new trajectory and you'll be changed from the inside out.
And then we got Easter.
Then we got to hide the eggs.
We got Easter.
Then we got to hide the eggs.
My kids are all into the eggs.
Oh, yeah. So the eggs, I never understood that. It's just like I don't understand the Christmas tree with the nativity. But I'm sure it wasn't always this way for you. I know, listen, everybody has to find their path in life.
Right.
And you have a pretty interesting.
I was going to say, you weren't born saying, I'm going to be a pastor.
Heck no.
See, me, I lost my faith in college. I did.
Okay,
I
yeah.
lost my faith. I was very tied into my faith when I went to college.
You were an atheist, is that right?
No, I wasn't an atheist. I was going into college for theological studies.
Oh, my goodness.
And I lost my faith. I had a class taught by an ex-Jesuit priest called Dr. John Becker. It was The Bible as Literature, because when you read the Bible as literature,
Sure.
it's violent. It's violent.
You're right about that. It's tough, isn't it?
David cuts off foreskins. Saul told him to go get the foreskins. David cuts off. I mean, think about that. You don't just cut off the foreskin of a man and let him walk away. It doesn't happen that way. The whole thing comes off. So it's a violent book.
I am not going to touch that. I'm going nowhere near it.
You're not supposed to use your teeth, Mike. But it's
Oh, my goodness.
it's not. It's a violent book, and so I lost my faith for a long time. I lost my faith, and it thankfully it returned. But when you were growing up, like, what was your path?
Yeah. Well, okay, so I started in a secular Jewish family, and that was through my father's influence. That's how he was raised. My mother went along with it. She said, let's do this. We went in the synagogue, and my father disappeared roughly when I was around 10 or 11 years old. He literally disappeared. That was it. It was in the 60s. He was a musician, trained in, he was Atlanta Symphony. He was trained at the highest level of conservatory music and all of that. And he just reached that place where the creative arts took over, and he became a different man. And it was violent. It was when he left.
Did he physically disappeared, or he disappeared as your father figure?
Both.
Both.
Yeah. He just
Did he go
left the
traveling
family.
with the Grateful Dead or anything like that?
Probably. I never heard about the Grateful Dead, but it was a lot of Inagata Davida. It was
Iron
going
Butterfly,
down,
yeah.
right? So yeah, he was one of the early responders to the drug scene, and it just radically altered his brain, his mind, his life, and how he treated us. And so there was both a sadness when he left, but also a gladness. Things just began to settle down.
Sigh of relief, maybe.
Totally.
Yeah.
And so we became a family of just agnostic. We quit everything. And then when I was 15 years old, the lady up the street, the proverbial kind of Saturday Night Live church lady, came down, knocked on the door, told me she wanted to give me a gift. Turns out it was a Bible. I'd never read the Bible. I never knew God. I never cared about God. I was just an angry kid who had a busted family, and this woman gave me that. I just sort of laughed when she left. And when you're in the South, you say, yes, ma'am, no, ma'am, thank you, ma'am, all that. You just go through the polite things. And then when she left, I just made fun of her, and I thought, who is this woman? She's just crazy. And I took it off. My mother came out when I was 18 going off to college, and she said, hey, you have this left in your closet. You got this book that I'd never cracked open. And I took it off to college, and for some strange reason, for the first time, I began to read it. I saw the table of contents, the book of Psalms, the book of Job, the book of, it's like all these things. I was totally 100% biblically illiterate. And yet somehow, some way, I saw my brother's name. It was Mark. I began to read the Gospel of Mark, and I had this encounter while I was a college student. So while you were walking away from God in college, which is a very common story, what's uncommon is somebody who meets God, and God pursued me, and I had a heart change while I was in the dorm. And it was just a game changer for me. It just changed who I was. It was a change from the inside, and it changed how I behaved on the outside.
Now,
too.
this was at University of North Carolina, I would imagine, right?
Yeah, so I was in the UNC system the whole time, and
So he's got the Tar Heel blue hat on.
At a big college. At a big college. Think about how rare this is, where other kids are going out and partying, you're sitting in your dorm finding God.
yeah, I know.
That's amazing.
I had a little trickle over the parties, you know.
Of course.
little trickle.
You're
over.
human.
Put the Bible down for a couple minutes.
Yeah, right.
But you know
right.
what? That's an important point.
Yeah,
That's
it
an
was a
important-
process for me. It wasn't.
You're a human being, which means you're fallible. You know, you are not infallible. You've done all the things that human beings do. You've
Yep.
imbibed, I'm sure. You know, you've sinned and done all different things. And if you didn't, and if you told me you didn't, I would think less of you because I know you weren't telling the truth.
Sure.
You know.
Well, I will say, and this is being transparent here, but I will say that 2 or 3 things left me instantly when I had this encounter in the dorm room. One is that I was no longer angry. It was gone. It was just, I can't explain it, but it was just, I had peace. First time in my life, 18 years old, had peace. Second thing is I instantly quit smoking cigarettes. Just stopped.
Cold turkey, just
Cold turkey. It wasn't even like I was trying. It's like, oh, I haven't had a smoke. Then it's a week later. Then it's 2 weeks, and you just forget about it. Now, you know, I could still. Here I am, like decades later. Sometimes I smell a cigarette and I think, wouldn't that be nice?
See, I'm a reformed smoker. I smell cigarette smoke. I'm like, thank God I stopped because that does not smell good. That doesn't. You know, when I was doing it, it seemed like the right thing to do at the time. But I had a friend of mine who quit smoking, and somebody told him, oh, just go cold turkey. Comes back 2 weeks later, you know, I bought a pound of cold turkey and I put it in my lip and it's not working. I'm not kidding you.
No
Like
way.
that's a real thing. That's a real
Wow.
thing.
Kevin did grow up with the smartest people.
No, this is North Jersey. This happened in North Jersey. But that's so
Brilliant.
Jewish kid finds God. And you know, I have to point this out because there's a lot of people out there that don't realize that Jesus was Jewish. I'm not kidding you.
Oh, man.
My
Basic.
father was one of them. My father, I go, you know,
Jewish carpenter.
I go, you know, Jesus was a Jew. No, he wasn't. I'm like, what
Was
was he?
Catholic.
No, he's Christian. Really? Like, really? But that's the biblical illiteracy that you talk about. Now, there's a lot of people that have it.
Well, the whole community. I mean, every Christian owes we owe our existence of our faith to the Jewish people who gave us the concept of God, a creator, a single God, that God is all powerful, all knowing, all present. That
Has a sense of humor too.
oh man,
He's got a sense of humor
You
like
got
I've
that
never
right.
seen.
for real.
Yeah. But so I speak about this in one of our sponsors, Belladama Cigars. By the way, go to BelladamaCigars.com, put in the Suffering 10, and you'll get a special discount. But our very good friend Chantal Leavitt is Jewish, and we go back and forth all the time because she is not a practicing Jew. She is more of a Christian person. But you know, I consider her my sister for many different reasons. Like I've never had a sister. I only had a brother. I never had a sister because we connect on a lot of different things because she is, you know, spiritual, which I'm always leery of spiritual people.
Sure.
Spiritual people get the opportunity to do whatever they want to do, you know?
And blame it on their spirituality.
Yeah. It's like, I'm going to drink a lot tonight, but I'm spiritual. I'm going to sleep around.
I'm sure the drink helped you to be spiritual.
I'm going to sleep around with women, but don't worry, I'm spiritual. You know, I'm not religious, but I'm spiritual. So that always shocked me. Now, would you consider your father leaving just one of your biggest sufferings of your life?
It was my initial era of suffering.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Your initial foray into suffering.
Right. So when you have a dad who comes to get you at school and his hair is down to his bottom, it's cool now, but back then it wasn't so cool, you know. Yeah. And your parents embarrassed you, and then there are those violent moments where my father was actually trying to kill my mother, choke her to death, and I jumped on his back, and then he swung me off, but it brought enough sense into him to stop. I mean, this is what goes on behind the scenes in closed door homes.
Was that like a drug induced thing at that point?
It was not. He was just an angry, violent man. And then when I had my encounter, in college, and it was 3 years later. I was a junior in college, and I was reading Malachi chapter 4. That's the last book of the Old Testament. And by the way, with the Jewish part of it, they not only gave us the concept of God, but they gave us the Bible, they gave us the prophets, they gave us the covenants of God, they gave us the wisdom of God, they gave us Peter, Paul, and Mary, they gave us, the whole gang. So, and Jesus himself, of course. So that moment in college, when I got the last verse of the Old Testament, it says that God says that I will restore the fathers to the children and the children to the fathers. And when I read that, I knew on the inside, it's like the Bible sometimes, it's called living and active. And when that word came to me, I knew that I need to go find him. It had been 10 years. So I went and I found my father. He was in California. I went and visited him. We got reconciled. And that's just a simple statement with 3 days of just heartbroken conversations.
A lot of tears.
A lot of tears. But he manned up and he said, I'm sorry. And I looked at him and I said, I want you to know I forgive you. Forgiveness is probably one of the most powerful things in the universe that really helps to turn suffering around. And we suffer, but for me to get that load off of my chest, off of my heart, the poison left me at that moment. And then his issues he had to own his issues because his own son would not condemn him and keep us in that vicious cycle of death and revenge and destruction and bitterness and unforgiveness. So I walked away a free young man. I was free, and it changed my life. And a year or two later, he called me. He said, can I come out and see you? I was in Chapel Hill, and he came out to see me, and that became his turning point where he just broke, and he cried for like 2 hours and just wept and wept and wept. And then I called my brother. He was at Duke. He was a Duke guy. I was a Chapel Hill guy. And
Well, it must have been good holiday dinners at your house.
Tremendous. Just the greatest rivalry in history. It's just so awesome. But my brother came over to witness. I just said to my dad before he got on the plane, I said, I'm going to baptize you. And so filled up the bathtub. We didn't have any water. We didn't have any holy water or church water. We just had a tub. So I baptized my dad in the tub. He got on that plane and he ended up moving back to be a part of my life and our church. He married, after 3 wives and 3 broken homes and all that stuff, he married the sweetest middle-aged woman in our community, and she's still with us today, Jeannie. They had a very, very happy and joyful marriage. He became a counselor. He went back and got his second master's degree, this time in Christian therapy. And he became a man who healed a lot of men of their afflictions and diseases, mental diseases, mental health problems, and all that.
Because it sounds like he forgave himself.
You got that right.
And that's the big thing. It's because
Yes.
Mike and I struggle with this. I never forgive him. I can't forgive him. But
He's beyond forgiveness
Yeah,
now. I mean,
you
it's
guys.
just-
but
we
Mike
just deal with each other now.
Mike and I think we have a tough time forgiving ourselves because when our lives were in chaos and had no direction, we did some very unhealthy things. We did some bad things. And to the point where, how can I ever come out of this? I can't. I'm a horrible person. I don't belong here. I just, there's no place in this world for me anymore.
The world would be better off without me.
Yeah, we and then you start going down a real big rabbit hole.